Abortion. It's legal in Canada, but it still brings up many strong emotions in Canadians. Now the question is, are both sides truly free to express their viewpoints in the country, or is there maybe a bit of a double standard? Carol Crosson is a Calgary constitutional lawyer who's representing Lethbridge and District Pro-Life and their court case with the City of Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks, Hal.
So give our viewers a little bit of backstory on this case here, Carol.
Well, this is a case that came before the court here in Lethbridge in October. But it goes back a while. So for a year and a half, Lethbridge Pro-Life worked with the city to attempt to get up one of their ads called Preborn Babies Feel Pain, and underneath the caption, say no to abortion. But after a year and a half, they were just making no headway, Hal. And so they asked me to write a letter to the city to ask the city for some clear reasons as to why they couldn't post the ad. And then a month later, the city said they'd post the ad. So that spring, the city indeed did post that ad, and within a few weeks, they pulled the ad down.
What was the reason behind it? Did they say it was too graphic, a lot of complaints?
No, the city said due to adverse community reaction. They said they'd received some complaints, around 100 correspondences, most of which they said were complaints.
We have 100,000 people here, 100 complaints? Yeah. That doesn't seem like a lot.
100 complaints, right. And from what we know now of the record, those were inspired in part by some abortion rights groups that did some lobbying to the city, some fairly aggressive lobbying to the city, and then the city pulled the ad. And in fact, in their publication of pulling the ad, they advertised the handles of two of the people that had done a lot of the campaigning. What's strange though, Hal, is at the same time there were two petitions that had circulated in the Lethbridge area by individuals outside of Lethbridge Pro-Life who gathered over 3,000 names on those petitions simply asking for the city to respect the free speech rights of Lethbridge Pro-Life.
And what became of that?
Not much, actually. In fact, when we got to court, the city had not even included that in the record of what had happened. So no response from the city, as far as we know, to the people that made the petitions. And the city chose instead to listen to the 100 rather than the over 3,000.
So the 100 people that did call in, email their councillors, maybe talk to the mayor, just call the city, many of those people, as well that we talked to here at Bridge City News, said it was just way too graphic. It was highly inappropriate. How do you respond to that?
Well, if you see the ad, which I'm sure your viewers will have a chance to, the ad is simply a picture of a baby in utero with the caption, "Preborn babies feel pain." I think that you'd find something like that in a high school textbook.
Now, the city actually argues, Carol, that the ads are causing emotional harm to people.
Well,
isn't that really subjective?
Let me just tie between the dots here.
Okay.
I'll draw a line between the dots on this. The first ad that was taken down, subsequent to that, Lethbridge Pro-Life went back to the city. They, no matter how they negotiated, they couldn't get that ad back up. So they asked for 5 new ads to be put up. Not Preborn Babies Feel Pain, but 5 new ads. And so those ads, they ranged anywhere from human rights should not depend upon where you are, with a picture of a pregnant woman on one side of the page, and on the other side, that same woman holding a baby. Birth did not transform me into a child, with a picture of a newborn baby swaddled up. Another one, equality should begin in the womb. Life should be the most fundamental human right. And the last one, a picture of 3 babies, one early in utero, further along in utero, and then a newborn baby saying, me, me again, and still me. Do you call those graphic, Hal? Are those scary, traumatizing ads?
Well, you wouldn't think so, right?
You wouldn't.
Did the Canadian Ads Standards Council get involved as well?
They did, yeah, and that was one of the reasons that the city refused the ads. They said they were relying upon their code of advertising. The Canadian Code of Advertising is a private code put out by a private regulator, Ad Standards Canada. It's not a group that has any legal clout. The Canadian Code is not legislation, but they did render a decision on those ads, and they said that they were inaccurate for various reasons.
Have we heard of any cases, Carol, of maybe pro-choice ads being removed or people complaining about those ads?
No.
Something comparable?
Nothing I'm aware of.
Wow. So what's next for you guys then?
Well, we're waiting for the decision, and we'll see what Justice Gates has to say. That was the justice that we sat in front of, and he was very attentive, very engaged. We had a great hearing.
What arguments did the city give, Carol, in regards to the ads allegedly containing inaccurate or misleading information?
Some of the reasons that the city gave in that the ads were inaccurate, I mean, one of them I find pretty fascinating. One of the ads was, "Birth did not transform me into a child." The city said that that ad was inaccurate because the law doesn't count a fetus as a child. And so the question at the hearing was, well, what does the law say? And in the criminal code does say that a fetus is a child. And when it's born, under 223 of the criminal code, it becomes a human being. And so it was difficult to address that in the hearing because the city had given a wrong answer on the law and refused the ad for the wrong reason.
Does the city actually have the authority to decide what is accurate and what's not when it comes to a controversial issue like abortion?
Well, Hal, the courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, have never entertained accuracy as a legitimate basis for denying freedom of expression. There was a case many years ago in regard to a Holocaust denier where the court said that false information was not a basis to restrict freedom of expression.
Now, essentially, this really boils down to the city not allowing the freedom of expression to all residents, even if it doesn't fit into what the city feels appropriate. Isn't this a bit of a slippery slope, though, for residents?
I think it's a slippery slope for all Canadians. I think all Canadians are experiencing an erosion of the right to free speech, a right to disseminate beliefs in Canada. This is what I litigate on consistently.
So when will we know what the court decision on this case will be?
Oh, it's a secret, Hal. I don't know. I don't get advance notice, but I'm sure it'll come out in prompt fashion.
Is there a comparable case that maybe the judge can reflect back on as saying, you know, this is a previous case, so we're going to go down a very similar road, making my decision?
There's some cases that the judge can draw on. There's been a number of bus advertising cases in Canada that the judge will look at. I'm hoping he will hearken back as well to the basic principles in freedom of expression.
Now, you're also representing an interesting case in Toronto too, Carol, where Pastor David LYNN was arrested last summer for preaching the gospel in the gay village, I'm guessing around Church Street in Toronto here, allegedly causing a disturbance.
Right.
But you say otherwise. It wasn't he causing the disturbance, but maybe the protesters?
It's a very interesting case. I mean, it's a novel case here in Canada, and I think it's unsettling for a lot of people. Hal, I think a lot of pastors are concerned about it. The very first hearing I attended, the courthouse was flooded. I would say hundreds of pastors attended, many of them immigrant pastors. And Hal, I think that's because those folks, they came from other countries to Canada for our freedoms. And so when those freedoms are now being threatened, it's important for them to be part of the discussion.
Well, Toronto Mayor John Tory went on record saying that free speech has its limits. How do you respond to that?
Well, you know, Mayor Tory is 100% right, but these were the wrong limits. The law already gives us limits on freedom of speech. And you know what's interesting in the case of David LYNN? He experienced those limits that very morning. See, that incident in question where he was arrested, he was on something called his Toronto tour. David LYNN is a street preacher. He's preached for years, 22 in total in the GTA, 10 in downtown Toronto. He was on a tour. He was going to different locations in Toronto. And just that morning, he'd been harassed by a woman. Some individuals had tried to destroy his property. He carries a mic and a speaker with him. And there were police at the scene. And he and his associates asked the police, "Are we doing anything wrong that we're being harassed like this?" And the police said, "No, unless you advocate genocide under the criminal code or you're guilty of hate speech, no, you have a right to freedom of expression." But that was not so that afternoon.
What's interesting too is I was in Calgary recently at a Tim Hortons location, and I saw this young man came in, and he was actually preaching to a lot of the younger people. When I say young man, he's probably 30, 35, okay?
Yes.
But he was preaching to some of the teenagers at Tim Hortons, right? And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. That's unique or different. But at the same time, that can be unsettling for some other people that may want to consider suing, or maybe could the owner of that establishment sue that individual for coming in?
Well, the difference there, Hal, is that that's private property. But on government property, on city streets, the courts have been clear. We have a right to exercise our charter rights. And that's exactly what David LYNN was doing that day. In fact, I don't know if you've seen the video, but on YouTube there's raw, unedited footage of that day, of that incident. All he's sharing is John 3:16, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And there he is sharing that, and the officer comes up to him and says, "I'd like you to turn that mic off." And he said, "Well, I know I don't have to because it's legal for me to use a mic," but he turned it off, and then he said, "I'm going to go back to preach." And the officer said, "No, you can't. If you go back to preach the gospel, then I'm going to arrest you for causing a disturbance. You're upsetting these people." And that's never been a justification for prohibiting somebody's speech. In fact, the courts in Ontario have come out in the past 2 years to say that is never a reason to restrict freedom of expression.
Do you think maybe down in the States they have more opportunities for freedom of speech than we have here in Canada? Less restrictions?
That may be. I mean, I know they're more vocal in some ways
Right.
down there than we are up
A lot of
here.
special interest groups, right, down in the States?
That could well be.
Strong voices?
Yeah, but I do know in Canada, our rights are being challenged. And you know, freedom is in the heart of every individual. That's what we live for. And it's the bedrock of a democracy.
Isn't it in our Constitution as well, Carol?
It is. It's the Charter.
Freedom of speech?
Section 2A is freedom of religion. Section 2B is freedom of expression. And that's the highest law in the land.
Where do you see this going in the next 5 or 10 years? Is it going to become more restrictive? Or do you think enough special interest groups, maybe Christians, or even other faith-based groups, you know, Jewish people, Muslims, Sikhs, say, you know, we've had enough. We want our voices heard, and we have every right to have that voice heard.
You know, Hal, if we do not exercise our rights and stand for our rights, we lose our rights. And so it will all depend on the Canadian population. Will we stand? Will you stand? Will I stand? I have many, many clients who stand. I have a client right now on a university campus in Toronto who's being told she can't get discrimination services because she believes the wrong thing. I have clients who've been assaulted and their assaulter found guilty under criminal law of assault simply because they share the wrong message. I mean, we see this.
So if it doesn't fall in line with maybe a college or university's ideology, and maybe an agenda they want to push, you know, that's when they'll be assaulted or attacked.
But if we allow it, it just gets worse. We can't allow it. We have to lovingly, firmly put our foot down. And so many people are, and I hope that that increases. Because when we do that, it's not just good for people who believe in certain values. It's good for everybody. Freedom of expression is truly for everyone. It's not just for the opinion that you believe. It's for the opinion of others. And that's what a democracy is all about. We have to maintain that. It's crucial.
Carol Crosson, Calgary constitutional lawyer, thank you so much for enlightening me and the education today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, Hal.